If you create a game with the title Pagan Online and within a year you announce the multiplayer servers are shutting down, then you could ask yourself what went wrong. Hey everyone, this is Thyworm, and today I wanted to create one final video about the game I have covered extensively for the last year. It is a game that is close to my heart for various reasons. Pagan Online. One final video to cherish some of the best moments this game had to offer, to see why the game didn't succeed in the end, and to hopefully provide an explanation and a bit of history on this game's development. And because I can now finally get rid of the 600 gigabytes of Pagan Online footage I have stored on external hard drives, because I knew this day would come and I knew I wanted to make a video about it. This is that video that has been on my mind since August 2019. It marks the end of an era, the end of Pagan Online. Today is August 4th, 2020, the date the multiplayer servers of Pagan Online shut down for good, less than a year after its release. It doesn't take a genius to figure out this game didn't do well, which is a shame because it had a lot of potential. So if you're here to bash a pretty much dead online game, you're in the wrong video. This video is not about that, although I will explain why the game didn't succeed in the end, and that's not always a pretty picture, but I'm not going to sugarcoat things either. Let's go back to 2011. Mad Hat Games is a studio that is making a name for themselves and won awards as well by creating HOPAs. Now, if you're not immediately familiar with the genre, HOPAs are hidden object puzzle adventures and not the kind of games that most gamers would identify with. Even the developers at Mad Hat Games, who have been working on HOPAs since 2011, acknowledged it is not their favorite genre either. Deep down, they had a dream. They wanted to make a new action RPG. After a few years of creating HOPAs, Mad Hat Games started to work on those dreams and created the predecessor of Pagan Online called Kingwitch. When I interviewed the developers, they explained that they made the rounds with this Kingwitch game, which was more like a tech demo. During various events, they stumbled upon wargaming, the guys and girls behind World of Tanks, and both Mad Hat Games and wargaming would take a leap of faith. Wargaming would get an action RPG in their portfolio of free-to-play games, and Mad Hat Games would get a publisher and a bunch of cash and resources. What Mad Hat Games really set out to do was to put the action back into action RPG. Kingwitch was much slower paced than the competition. It had well animated visceral combat, dodge mechanics, and Kingwitch was much more comparable to games like Shadows Awakening or Kill Squad than to something like Diablo 3. After the partnership with Wargaming, they changed the title into Pagan Online, and Kingwitch became one of the main characters in that game. In 2018 and 2019, Pagan Online went into the trials, the closed alpha test where the community got hands-on experience with the game. The game felt fresh, the game felt good, people were excited, just like Wargaming was excited when they played Kingwitch. And it's not hard to understand that, as the game, even in its very early stages, felt polished, was rather fleshed out in terms of combat, featured different and interesting classes, and there was simply a lot to like about this game. There were also things not to like. Three things in particular became apparent rather quickly when the game ended the trials and launched into early access on April 18th, 2019. There were a lot of issues. The first bunch of issues were temporary, mainly server issues. After those were resolved, or at least mostly, Pagan Online at launch had basically three core issues, at least according to the community and the Steam reviews, which weren't super positive, to put it mildly. The issues were: 1. WASD movement, 2. There was no co-op, 3. It looked and partially played like a mobile free-to-play game. Let's zoom in a little bit on these issues and why they were issues to begin with. During pre-production, before the game's launched in early access, some tough decisions were made. In an interview with Game World Observer in May 2019, just after the game released on Steam, Uros, the game director, says that opting for WASD movement was probably the toughest choice they made. Turns out he was right, even though it was the correct choice. It came back to haunt them, very much so. Especially on Steam reviews, the WASD movement caused a bunch of negative stuff. So, was it not stated that this game had WASD movement? As a matter of fact, it was, but some people expected something else. I think partly this was because Mad Hat didn't mind comparing their game to Diablo. A flattering comparison to be sure, but from a marketing standpoint, maybe not best choice. You could see how expectations weren't always properly managed if you think you're getting something like Diablo. Even in the interview, Diablo comes up multiple times, and Diablo or Diablo-like games are always click to move. Controller versions obviously not included, but hey, let's not go there. Besides, this was a PC game. Although WASD movement was pretty clear for the insiders, myself included, this wasn't the case for everyone. Maybe if they would have been clearer about the twin stick system and less eager to compare Pagan Online to click to move, more classic action RPGs, this could have been avoided. I feel, however, we should also look realistically at the unrealistic expectations of gamers these days, and I see just in general a lot of hate towards WASD movement. Not really Pagan's fault, this one. Besides, it was part of their core design, WASD movement. They would never stray from it. Second issue, the game launched without co-op in early access. Pagan Online, the title kinda gives it away, is a game very suitable for online co-op with short gaming sessions and fun interactions between characters. As a matter of fact, you could argue that this game was at its core a couch co-op twin stick action RPG. You could log in with a buddy, play for a bit, have some fun. That would be amazing. That would be really all you need. Unfortunately, in the initial version of the game, version 0.1.1, co-op wasn't there. Much to the dismay of the player base, who retaliated at the lack of co-op on various forums and within several reviews. Once again, this was clearly stated in that same article, but of course not everyone reads those articles. I think Steam actually mentioned co-op on the store, even though it wasn't there yet. It also took Mad Hat Gaming about a month to implement it, which is pretty decent, you could argue, but after the implementation it was very rocky to say the least, with a bunch of bugs, disconnects, unresponsive friends list and a whole heap of other multiplayer issues. And during the course of the game's development, multiplayer was never really smooth, always just a little bit or very far off, which obviously hampered the game severely. Something much more important, which was not clearly stated, was that the co-op was only working for the side quests, not for the main content, which was the campaign. Without question, the campaign was the bread and butter of the game, featuring a strong story, funny characters, many interesting zones, actual boss fights with mechanics, just a lot of cool stuff to enjoy. However, you could not play this in co-op mode, which was very disappointing for people. What was left were rather boring side missions, instance-based zones, and that was really all not that interesting, but it would be there soon, they said. Third issue, the game felt like a free-to-play game. From the start, Pagan Online used several mechanics that reminded people of the free-to-play genre. Daily login bonuses, loot boxes, short gaming sessions, a vibrant color palette and seemingly simplistic UI and gameplay. But the latter was not true at all, because Pagan Online was actually rather tough from time to time, with very snappy, responsive combat as you would expect from WASD movement, and combat was one of the biggest selling points of Pagan Online. But the other features had no place in a buy-to-play game of €24 at early access launch. There wasn't a cash shop or anything, but it made you wonder what the design philosophy was during development. What didn't help here was the reputation of Wargaming, which published free-to-play games like World of Tanks and World of Warships. In time, most of the free-to-play elements were removed from the game, and the developers made it very clear they were against a free-to-play model for Pagan Online. And to their credit, they stayed true to that philosophy, even though going free-to-play might have saved the game. In time, most of the issues were resolved, but as time progressed, other issues emerged. More fundamental, core design issues. There was basically no endgame. Finishing the campaign was extremely hard. Loot drop rates were very low. Many game modes felt unrewarding. These were issues often heard within the community, and I made my fair share of videos about these topics to raise awareness and hopefully incentivize the developers to change their game a little bit. They either didn't do it or it took a really long time. You see, Pagan Online had some difficulty settings that were ridiculously hard and extremely frustrating to the more casual player. Progressing through the campaign could be really rough with steep gear checks and very difficult, very unforgiving mandatory side quests in place that flat out caused people to rage quit. I made several videos about how you could basically cheese the game to not get one shot, which ended up being my most popular Pagan videos simply because the demand was so high. Only the most hardcore players would defend the design decisions made for campaign progression, while a large part of the player base struggled. I'm not claiming they didn't listen to feedback, because they did, and many community features made it into the game, but some of the core issues that were prevalent pretty much from the start were not changed to appeal to a larger audience. A commendable stance perhaps, but also detrimental to the enjoyment of quite a few players, including myself. Marketing wise, there were some learning points too. As we have seen with other action RPGs in the past, setting high expectations and then not delivering the goods can be rather problematic for your game. I personally think that it is perfectly understandable and defendable that you create a vision for a product which changes over time, but time windows for Pagan Online were short, development cycles tight, and not that much was being done about these core issues. There was one bigger issue, however, one overarching issue, which were the expectations set by Wargaming and Mad Hat Games. They both used strong language to introduce big patches, for example, and promised amazing new features. Existing issues weren't solved, like endgame campaign and loot, while new features were teased. It is June 2019 by now. The game is in early access for 2 months and a whole heap of new stuff is promised in a shiny rainbow roadmap. To me, this was sort of a breaking point in the development of the game. While I was excited for the new features, I also saw the core problems weren't getting fixed. More so, there was a growing disconnect between large parts of the community and the devs and publisher of Pagan Online, who held on to a vision or stubbornness, depending on how you look at it. Despite devlogs, which were very enjoyable, interesting and well made, and despite the best intentions of the developers whom I've personally met, all sorts of ideas and features that they envisioned Pagan would have simply didn't translate to the actual game, and they failed to recognize what their own game was, which was a strong co-op campaign focused game with a lot of replayability due to many different characters, gear and crafting. Instead, they focused on endgame, more loot, more cosmetics, more variety. In the meantime, co-op in the campaign still wasn't implemented, and endgame was very boring and basically non-existent. Endgame consisted either of very high difficulty side quests, some crafting which required a lot of repetitive farming, or a wave-based arena-style game mode called the Gauntlet. The developers even put me and a bunch of other content creators in there as part of the Gauntlet. I was the boss of the second difficulty level, out of 5. Not bad, I guess. I was flattered to be immortalized in an actual game. I mean, when does that ever happen, right? Without paying for a Kickstarter. But the Gauntlet was still boring. I really didn't go out that much to kill myself. This was not to say the game wasn't fun. As a matter of fact, I had quite a bit of fun. I had so much fun that I dedicated most of my spare time into creating videos about Pagan Online. I did believe in the future of this game, but that belief was slowly crumbling. I saw the game for what it was, something very original, something made with a lot of attention to detail, something that could potentially shake up the action RPG world a bit with its combat system, which was really fleshed out and impactful. It packed a decent punch. Pagan Online slowed down the action considerably, making you aware of monsters and monster abilities, making you dodge attacks, implementing battle mechanics and AoE effects that had more in common with World of Warcraft than with Diablo 3. WASD movement played a pivotal role in all this, as it allowed for precise timing, and dodging and mastering a class really took time. But once you did, you were rewarded with the potential to use your skills like a true master, capable of outplaying any enemy in the game. It was a nice change compared to other games, where speed and potion mashing was sometimes synonymous with endgame. Not so much with Pagan Online, that had multiple boss battles with their own mechanics, You would even chase a dragon along a bridge and shoot harpoons at the damn thing to bring it down, Skyrim style, and only then you could defeat it, given you would be agile enough to dodge its fire breath and minions. There were a lot of things to like about the game, and in particular the campaign, which easily lasted around 30 hours or more. But once again, because there was all this talk about endgame, a lot of people thought the campaign was just a starter, while in reality it was the main course. Endgame was like a tiny dessert, and not even a very sweet one. 1 month later, July 2019, the bomb hits. Pagan Online posts a new community update that states 3 things. 1. Pagan Online will launch on August 27th, 2019. 2. Pagan Online gets a Might and Glory Club, a bunch of ambassadors for the game. 3. Pagan Online will be at Gamescom. The first statement, the August 27 launch date, is a little problematic for at least 2 reasons. First, Pagan Online simply wasn't ready. So many things were either not completed, not balanced, or flat out broken. And with a month of development time left, everyone knew this wasn't going to be a great game at launch. Campaign co-op still not there in July, and by now people kinda lost faith. It had become a bit of a meme, campaign co-op, and understandably so. It was obvious to most people, apart from the hardcore fans, that Pagan Online had a long way to go in terms of development if it was going to be what it inspired to be, a living, breathing multiplayer world with endgame. During my interview with the developers, literally a couple of days before the launch, they were still daydreaming about creating an open world, more pets and cooking. Cooking, ladies and gentlemen. It was a meme, but we were talking about cooking and the game wasn't ready. They sort of acknowledged that, by the way, saying that the launch was just the start of the journey. Unfortunately, we later found out the launch was actually basically the end of the journey, leaving the community with a lot of promised features that would never see the light of day. The launch date had another small issue though. This small issue with August 27th, 2019 is that another small indie studio called Blizzard was going to release a relatively unknown multiplayer open world game called World of Warcraft Classic. Only a couple of million people would be playing that, only tens of thousands of streamers would cover that, including the ones that would normally cover Pagan Online, like Bearded Check, Ferlina and myself. Only every gaming news media outlet would cover this event and nothing else. But apart from that, despite multiple questions from the community regarding this particular date, the response was that they didn't think it would compete with World of Warcraft. I have it on pretty good authority that this wasn't the decision of Mad Hat Gaming. The developers poured their hearts and souls into this project, and although it had its fair share of issues, it was definitely a very decent game if you just bought it for the right reasons. For the campaign, and then it was definitely worth the 25-ish euro price tag. No one at Mad Hat Games wanted to release at this date and compete with World of Warcraft, but they had no say in the matter. Wargaming was pulling the strings, and for whatever reason, Wargaming decided this was going to be the plan. It's worth mentioning that this entire project, Pagan Online, would have never happened without Wargaming, of course, as a publisher. Why they chose this date out of all release dates in 2019 will be a mystery forever, I fear. The second statement was regarding the Might and Glory Club. Basically, a bunch of ambassadors for the game. In theory, pretty solid idea. Execution-wise, however, it wasn't all that great. Anyone with a single brain cell could apply and would get in, and so they did. There was no moderation at all, and what was supposed to be a group of dedicated content creators, and there were quite a few, quickly turned into a bunch of random people who had no affinity with the game whatsoever, who just wanted the free key, and some of them were even openly trashing the game and its community members on Twitch. It was not a good look. The third statement was very positive, in particular for me, because around July I received a phone call from Sasha, the community manager for Pagan Online. By that time I had been making many videos about the game, probably around 70 or so, making guides, creating builds, doing all that stuff. If you know me now from last epoch, you could say that Pagan Online was basically the predecessor, and I was as dedicated to that game as I am now to last epoch. I was one of the main content creators for the game, and as a token of their appreciation they invited me to come to Gamescom for a few days, meet the developers, meet Sasha, do an interview and just have some fun. I accepted, of course. I never went to something like Gamescom before. I had no idea what to expect, and I was wondering why all these people were walking around with chairs. I can tell you, Gamescom is a very peculiar place. I was registered as official press, I got a press card, met some cool fellow creators in the business area, played a bunch of games the first day of Gamescom when it was only opened up to the press and not the public, and overall I had an amazing time in Cologne. The weather outside was beautiful, I was regularly out on the terrace just by myself drinking beer, enjoying the moments, and I was truly grateful for the recognition that both Wargaming and Mad Hat Games showed by extending that invitation. I had only around 1,000 subscribers, and it was definitely the pinnacle of my YouTube career, which I don't even consider a career as I happen to enjoy my real life job. The cherry on top was a live interview in a serious TV streaming setting, live on the Twitch channel of Pagan Online, a whole production crew and everything, where I would interview the game director Uros and lead designer Emil. It was my first time doing anything like that live, although I interviewed people before, primarily in the movie industry, for which I wrote a bunch of articles years ago. This was something completely different. I was nervous, tried to read chat, have a conversation and interview two people I never met all at the same time. It was amazing though. Gamescom was an experience I will never forget, with smelly gamers, enormous queues, noisy stands, terrible music, a lot of beer, a lot of bratwurst, a super chill environment, way too many games and just a completely different world filled with weird people, cosplay girls and me. The only guy out of 375,000 people who wore a dress shirt. Meeting the people, the creators behind the game that I covered so much was cool too, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity once again. The standard wargaming build at Gamescom was also rather impressive. They had actual tanks, part of a huge battleship, tons of games, a stage with all sorts of promotion, real life cosplay girls, only the female characters of Pagan Online were there, and for a moment I thought that maybe this game was going to be okay, you know? Maybe all this hype and free pets and t-shirts and all sorts of other goodies would convince people to buy Pagan Online. Maybe they would tell their friends and they would buy the game too. Maybe the future plans of Pagan Online and all its promised features would get made. After all, the hype got to me a little bit, but deep down I knew this was wishful thinking. Then, August 27th, launch day. As expected, the whole world is looking at Warcraft. Method organized a massive world first event that went on for days, sucking in a lot of viewers. The literal god himself pulled even more views, hundreds of thousands of views for this mere mortal. Pagan Online streamers were running around in Azeroth. Basically, no one mentioned Pagan Online. No one wrote about it. Weeks after the launch, you couldn't find more than 3 reviews on Metacritic, all from websites you never even heard of. Some weren't even in English. The game basically fell flat on its face right after launch and unfortunately never recovered. I went home after Gamescom and played the game for maybe just a few hours. I felt I experienced all the highlights of the game around Gamescom and didn't want to really see what would happen next because I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. I looked at all the footage I recorded over the last 6 months, 600 gigabytes, and I looked at all the almost 80 videos that I created about this game with much love and compassion and dedication, and decided I didn't want to throw all of that away. So I purchased a hard drive to put it on, because right at the launch it was clear to me this game was a commercial flop and therefore not viable. I made one more video on it, a rather negative one but a necessary one, about the launch in particular and why Pagan Online wasn't a success in the end. And that was it. I never really played the game ever again. And campaign co-op? It was implemented October 25th, 2 months after the release of the game. After this, no substantial updates have been made to the game. Around Christmas, they turned the Pantheon into a Christmas tree and gave us a pet, and then things got really quiet. Really quiet. Until recently, with the announcement that today multiplayer servers are shutting down and the game is only available as a single player experience on Steam. Ironically, a feature that was requested quite a bit for Pagan Online. It wasn't successful in the end, but it was a good journey nonetheless. While this video explains how basically everything came to be, I hope I've also stressed the bright sides of Pagan Online. There were plenty. They were very pretty from time to time. A heartfelt goodbye message from community manager Sasha is probably going to be the last meaningful thing on the Pagan Online Discord. If you're looking for a decent and fun single player action RPG with a good campaign that will keep you interested for at least 30 hours, check out Pagan Online on Steam. Maybe it will even work with Steam's remote play in the future, who knows. Single player is definitely worth the money as well though. It is just a shame Pagan Online couldn't live up to the expectations primarily set by the game itself. This was Thyworm with one final Pagan Online video. Be well, pagans, and who knows, we may meet again. See you all soon. Bye bye.